welcome. This is our Progressive Democrats of America's Roundtable as we begin our 13th, lucky 13th Roundtable. We want to welcome everybody. We have a couple of program changes. Those of you who are dialing in, hoping to see Michael Darner. Michael, unfortunately, is sick today. We're shifting gears, and we're going to have a representative from Congressman Ellis's office here in a moment. Before we do that, though, we do want to share with everybody who's watching. It's one thing to meet here in D.C. It's another to reach those of you outside. The strength of this meeting is inside, outside. Those of us that are on the inside today doing what we can do, but more importantly, for those of you on the outside. So we can have a sense of who you are, and you have a sense of who we are. We wanted to just quickly go around and introduce ourselves. First of all, just to let you know who we are, but also what we hope to get out of the meeting today. This is an important meeting for progressive activists. The budget is where the rubber meets the road, as they say, and we're all here with a specific item I'm sure we're looking at. I'm Tim Carpenter. I'm with Progressive Democrats of America. I'm out of Northampton. Specifically today, I want to talk about some weapon systems that we can cut out of this defense budget, how we can bring our war dollars home, and also where we are on the single payer fight. Just recently, many of you hopefully have heard that Senator Bernie Sanders just had our first hearing on single payer, and we have a firsthand account of that, and I'm looking forward to that. Who are you?
Michael Leidy. I am the Director of Public Policy for National Nurses United.
Welcome, Michael. We'll go back around the room again if we could. Introduce yourself. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Chris Newbert with National People's Action.
I'm Emily Worth with Food and Water Watch.
Stephen Spitz of Progressive Democrats of America, co-chair of the End Corporate Rule Issue Organizing.
Now, you guys already defeated our purpose of introductions. What do you want to get out of today? What do you hope to get out of today? Emily, what do you hope to get out of today?
Well, I'd like to learn more about the Better Off budget and hopefully share a few key updates on the national fight against crime.
Great. What do you want to get out of today?
I'm really interested in digging into this budget and getting people's perspective.
And I think you arrived late, so I'm going to make sure you get one of those. All right, Stephen, what do you want out of today?
Yeah, basically the same thing, to learn a lot more about the budget.
All right, let's go to the back. We'll hear more from Mark in a minute.
I'm Mark Putzik from the Labor Campaign for Single Payer, and want to get a sense of where progressives are thinking on this rainy day in Washington.
I'm Len Mail. I'm from PDA and also from Coalition for Jobs for All. What I hope to get is how we can really fight to have a progressive budget and not an austerity budget.
From austerity to prosperity.
Steve Gobble, PDA, and I'd like to see how we can get more co-sponsors of the people's budget than we had last year.
Thanks, Steve.
Joe Robertson from Citizens Climate Lobby. I'm sorry. Well, we're a nonpartisan organization, and I'm just interested to hear about how to do something for the climate and carbon fight.
We're bipartisan also, you'll notice. Allie?
I'm Allie McCracken. I'm with COTAPE. We're also nonpartisan, and I'm interested in learning more about the budget and getting to know some of the people here.
And 30 seconds of personal privilege, House Medea.
Medea's okay. She sends her love to everyone here. She says hi. She's on the road for her book tour still. But she's back. She's safe, though her shoulder's really messed up.
Great. Thank you. Send her our love.
I will.
Mike?
Mike Hirsch, Communications Coordinator for Progressive Democrats of America, also the Maryland State Coordinator. And I want to find out what we can do to help get more support for the Better Off budget.
Corey Hartwich with National Nurses United, and I'm here to hear about the Better Off budget and also about the relevance tax and health fund.
Miriam Pemberton, Institute for Policy Studies. With a little short update on defense transition assistance in the context of the Better Off budget.
My name is Danny Richter with Citizens Climate Lobby. I'm interested in the carbon tax and Nottingham budget. I'd love to get some details.
Thanks, Danny.
My name is Daniel Parkhurst with Progressive Congress. I'm here to help engage with the wider progressive community and hear everyone's thoughts on the Better Off budget.
Daniel, do you have any endorsement forms for the budget with you guys today? If organization
Strictly online, and you would email Rachel Nussbaum as well as our executive director Gabby Lemus, and organizations can endorse the budget that way. If you want to.
And before we leave today, we'll make sure that we get all those announcements out that folks who are watching online, make sure they get registered and get the materials.
As well as citizen co-sponsorship, which is available.
Great. Thank you.
I'm Joe Sparks. I'm a freelance journalist. I am here to see what can be done to help the country go more in a direction that I would like. And I want to see if there's an overall arc or something that will tie everything together.
name is Nate Kinsey. I'm a Progressive Congress fellow. Just here to help get the word out about the budget and maybe talk to some of the environmental people in the room. That's my special.
Thanks. And Nathan brought with us a handout. Does everybody have one? Did everybody get a handout? Thank you, Nathan.
Stephen Miles, Win Without War, and I'll talk a little bit about what's in the budget for the Pentagon and some ways that we can trim some of that back and do some investing here at home.
Thank you, Stephen.
Hi, Melissa Bird with React Radio, and I'm here to make sure that we keep moving for more progressive change.
Do you want to bring that second up? Thank you, Melissa. All right, if we could, as I said, who did we forget? Whoops, Andrea.
I was just going to say that's okay. I'm Andrea Miller. I'm the Deputy Field Director for Progressive Democrats of America. And because I'll be here on Capitol Hill, dying to hear what people's ideas are about helping to push this budget forward.
Thanks, Andrea.
All right.
If we could, then we're waiting on.
There's our guy.
Hey, he made it. There he is. Hey, Mike, thanks.
Just to make sure we all knew it was in-district work period week.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
No, here.
Okay.
Mike, you want to formally introduce yourself? We just went around and introduced ourselves to everybody.
I'm Mike Casca. I'm Congressman Ellison's Communications Director. So I'll be doing a quick overview.
Before that, we want to thank you for making it pinch hitting for Michael Darner. For those of you who are watching at home, we won't talk about what jerseys up front. We don't want that to be a deal breaker. But I'm sure it has to do with Jackie Robinson.
Especially for our Bay Area folks. So everyone's really, you missed the introductions, Mike, but everyone's very interested in getting into the nitty-gritty on the Better Off budget, so we're really excited you're here.
So thanks everybody for coming. As I said, I'm the Communications Director for Congressman Ellison, so not a policy guy, so I know a little bit, but not a ton. So if you have any questions, we can definitely take those and pass them along to our policy folks. Make sure you get answers back. So if you could, I'll just give a quick overview of the budget.
If you could, remember we got folks at home as well as folks that are in the audience.
Are we good? Do we need to put Mike someplace else for the video?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, exactly.
For a little bit of just background for folks who may not be familiar with the caucus and what the budget, start from there, and then some more of the specificity as we get into it. Thank you.
Yeah, so every year the caucus puts together, this is our 4th year doing a budget. The early budgets were kind of basically end the war budgets, and then we started introducing more complicated policy proposals. Last year's budget was called the Back to Work budget. This year's budget is called the Better Off budget. The process kind of starts around the retreat, where we talk with folks like you guys, get some policy ideas, build out from there, working with members of Congress and with activists to put together a fiscal plan for the next year. This year's budget creates 8.8 million jobs by 2017, investing in infrastructure, putting teachers, firefighters, police officers back to work, which is great. The top line deficit reduction number, because we are working in the Beltway, is $4 trillion over 10 years. We actually have a better debt to GDP than the president's budget, yet we still create a lot of jobs. Some stuff that you guys might be interested in that's in here, we restore unemployment insurance, restore the SNAP cuts that have hurt folks over the last couple years. We have part of the NSA oversight that we've introduced in this budget is asking for top-line budget numbers from each intelligence agency, which currently we don't get from them. Financial transaction taxes in here. We also included Dave Camp's excise tax, which he introduced in his tax proposal that he put out just recently, as well as some other great stuff on taxes. You guys all have, do we all have documents?
They have a 2-pager in front of it.
Okay, yeah.
Or 26.
So yeah, if you guys are interested in getting, we have a longer, we actually have, this is what the full budget looks like. It's just a large document describing policy priorities. So if you want that, you can just shoot Michael Darner, our executive director, an email. I'm sure he can get it to you guys. So yeah, do we want to take some questions?
If we just open it up and do some dialogue.
Yeah, that's great.
Again, questions, direct them to Mike and let us know who you are for people in the audience. Everybody has to review. Just direct your questions.
And we can repeat them on the mic if we want.
Yeah.
I have a question about the carbon tax. My name is Danny Richter with Citizens Climate Lobby. What's it start at? How much does it increase by? And where does the money go?
The question is about the carbon tax. When does it start? How much money it generates?
And how does it increase?
And how does it increase over time?
So, like I said, because I'm the communications director, I'm not in the policy, so I can just.
A little louder too.
So I can read the description for you. Maybe that'll help. So imposes on polluters a $25 per ton price on carbon dioxide, rebating 25% of all revenues as refundable credits to protect low-income families. The Energy Information Administration found that a similar proposal would result in carbon emission reductions of 26% below 2005 levels by 2020. If you want any more specifics on it, I'll take the question and I can pass it on to Darner. I can get back to you. Yeah. So if I just get your contact info to
The big
Tim.
victory last year was getting the carbon tax in last year. And the big victory again this year is to roll it back in.
Yeah.
They just tweaked the numbers a little bit. Do you work with James? Yeah, you're from the same center. So James has been following this very closely. We're very excited. In addition to the carbon tax, on the revenue side, which is important, which Mike can't speak to a little bit, but I know Michael Lighty can, is on the revenue side a little bit, some more specificity on the Robin Hood tax. Michael, maybe you could take that a little bit, and then Michael Lighty can add into it. In addition to the carbon tax, the one thing that we're very excited about as progressives is that we're finally taking the offensive rather than defensive. Rather than cutting, we're finding the revenue stream, beginning first with the carbon tax, and then we're
with the
going to hear
FTT.
more from both Mike and Michael in a minute on the Robin Hood specifically.
Yeah, so the budget does include the FTT, which you guys are probably familiar with the argument that Wall Street should have to pay for these transactions that they're partly due to the crash in 2009. But is there anybody here who wants to go into the FTT more in detail, or?
Hi, I'm Joe Sparks. Just, do you know what the rates are for the FTT?
I don't know what the rate. I don't know the specific rates, but I can definitely get those to you.
Yeah, so I know a little bit about
go
it.
ahead.
So when we talk about the FTT, we're talking about a financial transaction tax or a finance speculation tax, which would be levied on stocks, bonds, derivatives. Derivatives are those things like credit default swaps that crash the U.S. financial system, and other options, like, for example, when you bet on the price of copper. That's an option on a commodity. And in the Better Off budget, the rate on equities is 0.25, and it goes down from there. By comparison, Europe, 11 Eurozone countries are looking at rates on stocks of 0.1 or 0.2. The bill that Mike's boss, Representative Ellison, has a rate of 0.5 on stock transactions. And then in the Better Off budget, I think you're down at 0.004 on
Bond
bonds,
transactions, yeah.
and then 0.01 on derivatives, if I'm...
Yep.
Yeah. So what you're basically looking at there when you're looking at a scale on a financial transaction tax is based on the cost of the transaction. So that stocks have a higher transaction cost than bonds, and bonds have a higher transaction cost than derivatives or options. So you scale the rate down accordingly. At the same time, derivatives there's a huge, much larger total amount that's traded in derivatives. So a lower rate on derivatives actually generates probably close to the majority of the income overall. I mean, for example, the currency exchange market, where traders are betting on the price of a currency relative to other currencies, is over a $5 trillion market a day. The $5 trillion in currency bets are made each day, to give you the scale of this. So it's quite remarkable, the amount of money in the global transaction system. That's, of course, a global number, not a U.S. number. So the Better Off budget raises, I think the estimate is about $110 billion per year,
Yeah, I think it's around there.
from these trades on Wall Street transactions. And it's so which is a huge number. We used to talk about the Bush tax cut as a large number. Well, this is much larger than that. So you're looking over a 10-year period of over $1 trillion.
Clarification, you said the rate is 0.04, now you meant 0.04%.
0.04%. Yeah, percent, sorry.
And I'd like to pose a question that I asked of an economist in talking about this. So, if I go to the store in Maryland, I think the sales tax is a little over 5%. So if I buy a pair of jeans in charge of 5% sales tax, why not do the same for these financial transactions?
Well, the basic reason is because we've done, Robert Poland, who's done the economic research on this, among others, what's unique about Dr. Poland's analysis is that he has looked at actual transaction costs. And in that case, even at the 0.5 rate, you're looking probably at a 50% reduction in the volume of trades. And at that rate, you're raising even more than the Better Off budget does. So what happens is there is an elasticity. And once you get to the point of a greater rate, you are going to reduce volume. 70% of the stock trades are made on a computer-generated basis. So you're basically looking at automatic trading, as it's called, high-frequency trading. Those have very, very, very low transaction costs and very, very marginal profit per trade. Many of those will no longer be viable, even at this rate, which is a good thing, because that will increase market stability. So that's really where you do the trade-off. At what point does the reduction in volume of trades exceed the, the value of a higher tax rate? That's the art of the rate setting. And yes, it's a sales tax that Wall Street should pay, because most people in the country pay sales tax. So why shouldn't they?
Yep.
Mike, this year the CPC I think is putting much more effort into really promoting this amongst its allies out in the countryside. ProgressiveCongress.org is going to be very focused on promoting this. Can you give the groups in this room some examples of how we can add to get this out there so that people know about this? It's a very, very exciting kind of budget.
Yeah.
It's hard for the Republicans to argue with, but if no one's hearing about it, it kind of defeats the purpose. So there's a lot of momentum. Can you describe some things that are going on?
Yeah, so per the usual, when it comes to the introduction of our budget, it doesn't get a lot of media coverage because folks kind of write it off as the budget that has no chance to pass.
Unlike the president.
Right, exactly, yeah. But stuff that groups can do that I think is really helpful is contact. We want to get the local media involved in this process, talking to local reporters in your neighborhoods, having folks host like gatherings where they kind of walk through the budget, talk about why it's an important priority, and invite a local reporter to come by and talk about how activists in a community are rallying behind the Progressive Caucus budget. Writing LTEs to your local paper is good, and holding events in districts are also very helpful, and the Progressive Caucus would like to be able to get members to help out to join those events as well. So any ideas you guys have are great. I think the number one ask right now, especially ahead of the Ryan budget being dropped, if it actually gets dropped, will be the media coverage would be great.
Just to add on to that so people are clear and watching on TV, today's just our first step. We've got another 2 to 3 weeks here. So we really want to spend today to barrel in and look a little more specifically at the numbers. We've talked already now a little bit about the carbon tax, a little bit about Robinhood. We're going to talk a little bit more action. Can you flip over on your summary, your 26-page summary, on the defense side? I'm going to ask Stephen if he can come up and talk a little bit. The specific numbers in the budget are similar to last year when the people's budget, the same number of looking for a $800 trillion cut over a 10-year period on the defense budget. If you could maybe read a little bit of that narrative and then bring Stephen up, and then specifically for us in the room and for people watching, this budget is in broad strokes. You're going to hear in a moment some big numbers. What we want Stephen to share with us are specific numbers on weapon systems that we in this room and watching over the course of the next couple of weeks can bring into the debate. So if I could again bring Stephen back up from Win Without War. Thank you, Stephen. And if you could just share a little bit of that narrative,
read the summary really quick,
we can dialogue a little bit about where we can come up, and then we'll get Miriam up here as well.
Yeah, so this is the section from the budget on defense. Pentagon spending has doubled over the last decade, straining our military and economy to the brink. With the war in Afghanistan drawing to a close this year, we need a leaner, more agile force to combat realistic 21st century risks. The Better Off budget responsibly ends operations in Afghanistan, brings our troops home, and focuses Pentagon spending on modern security threats instead of Cold War era weapons contracts. Just like last year and the year before and this year, we believe that it's time to bring the Defense Department into the modern world, and that includes spending intelligently, which we can talk about.
Sure. You want to bring the mic over? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So, again, Stephen Miles and Without War. The defense budget, or what we usually call the Pentagon's budget, is a bit hard to talk about because the numbers are just enormous. But so I was jotting down a cheat sheet from put together by a gentleman named Winslow Wheeler, who's at the Project on Government Oversight, because I think it actually bearing out just a bit of the scale that we're talking about. So one of the Republicans' favorite talking points as of late is that the Pentagon is only 20% of the federal government's spending, but it's borne 50% of the cuts done under deficit reduction. So first off, right out of the gate, that's blatantly untrue. It's borne very much less than 50% of the cuts, and we'll come back to that. But I just want to kind of run through, because the number you've probably heard and for defense spending that came out throughout the budget process recently is $495.6 billion, and that's a lot of money, right? That is a lot of money, but it's actually less than half of what we actually spend on national security and the Pentagon. When you add in what you spend, so that's just the Pentagon's base discretionary budget. They actually spend $6.2 billion in mandatory funds at the Pentagon. And then they have what's called the Overseas Contingency Operations, what's basically just a giant slush fund for the Pentagon. This used to be the fund that we paid for war with. Even then, we paid for lots of other things besides it, but that was back when we were fighting 2 wars and it was, near $100 billion, a little bit more. We still have $80 billion. This year it's $79.4 billion parked in that fund. That's roughly the level of funding that we had 3 years ago in Afghanistan, when we had 3 times as many troops in Afghanistan. By the end of this current fiscal year that this budget is for, we'll have hopefully 0, but at the highest levels of estimates, about 10,000 US troops. Again, that level of funding at that point will be for 8 times the number of troops that we had in Afghanistan. So what's happening is our troops are coming home, but our money's not. So when you add that in, now you're up at $581 billion, roughly, getting near $600 billion. Throw in another $20 billion for nuclear weapons that's funded out of the Department of Energy, another $10 billion-ish for other national security programs. Add in $26 billion that the president's requesting as part of his Opportunity Growth and Security Initiative, and you're up to $636 billion, but you're not done there. You've got just about $40 billion that the Department of Defense gives to the Treasury every year to pay for pension obligations and retirement, direct transfer to the Treasury. That's not in anyone's budget anywhere credited to the Pentagon. I mean, imagine another department. Imagine HHS saying, we're going to spend $40 billion on this program, but we'd really like it if you didn't count that money. Imagine if the Department of Labor said, we've got $40 billion in programs, but let's just not count that as money that we're spending. Add in $160 billion, that's what we pay for veterans. That's money well spent. That's money that's only going to go up as we continue to pay for the costs of the wars over the last couple decades. For example, for historical comparison, we are just roundabout now peaking in terms of per year cost for veterans from Vietnam. So we've got a ways to go for Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. We actually still have, the VA pays out 1 claim still on the Civil War. They have a handful of claims paid out on World War I. So we're going to be paying for Iraq and Afghanistan for a long time at the VA. Added a whole bunch of other stuff, including share of the national debt, interest payments, and you get to $1.009 trillion. So over $1 trillion in national security spending. The point is there's a lot in there that you can cut, a whole lot. And very little of that money in there actually does things like goes to take care of our troops, goes to take care of our veterans, pays the military, healthcare costs, the retirement pensions, the benefits for disabled veterans, pays for the jobs for the men and women who build the arsenal for our military, and a whole lot of that money goes right out the door to contractors. A whole lot of that money goes to other countries to buy American weapons for wars in other countries. And a lot of that money is wasted on weapons that we're never going to use, and even if we did try to use them, they wouldn't work. So we can get into all sorts of that stuff, but I really want to commend the CPC's budget for saying, not only can you invest in the men and women in uniform, not only can you take care of our veterans, not only can you help put some money in to ensure that our communities that depend on jobs from the Pentagon have good, strong jobs and transition to more stable and secure and sustainable jobs, but you can do all that and save hundreds of billions of dollars in the process. So I'll leave it there. And
Stephen, can I just ask, so my understanding, you take that lower number, your first number, your 496 billion number, that's still 55% of discretionary spending,
Yeah.
isn't it? Just that number.
Yeah.
So over half of the budget that's not marked in earned benefit programs like Medicare and Social Security is going to the military without counting the other $500 billion.
that's right, yes. Yeah. Which is why when Congress set up these discretionary spending cuts a couple of years ago, they said, well, let's do half and half defense and non-defense discretionary. They were trying to say it's about half and half of discretionary, so if we're going to cut it, let's cut it about half and half. That's where they started. I said I would come back to it. I should. The problem is the Pentagon has this slush fund, right? So the good folks at National Priorities Project looked into this, and they said, well, what happened? So last year, as part of sequestration, which is just devastating the non-defense side of the budget, what happened for the Pentagon? Well, Congressman Murray and Senator Murray and Congressman Ryan did a budget deal that got rid of about $20 billion of that cut. So it's $30 billion. Well, when you look at it, in the previous fiscal year, there was about $20 billion worth of expenses that was in that 490 give or change billion dollars of base funding that suddenly found its way over into that slush fund. So there went $20 billion. Then when Congress got around to doing the omnibus, doing their spending bill in January after the deal, they said, we still need some more money, so we're going to do that for $10 billion more. So then another $10 billion went over. So that entire $50 billion of cuts that was supposed to happen at the Pentagon never happened. The Pentagon's budget came down a little bit because we did some things like cut some funds that we were giving to Afghanistan and things like that, which were good. That was wasted money that we shouldn't be spending. But they did that so that they could keep putting this money back into wasteful programs of the Pentagon, and they didn't cut a penny. There was no $50 billion slush fund for healthcare or education or any of the programs that we're going to talk about in the rest of the budget. None of that got a reprieve, but the Pentagon got all of its money.
So what's the game plan on the slush fund over the course of the next month? What can we be doing with the National Priorities Project, U.S. Action, and others, Win Without War? What should be the focus for activists? In addition to the slush fund, any other specific weapon systems that you think are on the chopping block?
So the first thing is, again, that the CPC's budget is excellent in that it eliminates that slush fund. It says, look, you can have a little bit of money in that this year to make sure you get all the troops out of Afghanistan. A couple $1 billion, I don't know if it puts a number on it, but you can have some money to get the troops out. We all agree that's going to cost a little bit of money. But then next year, the year after, that money's gone. It gets rid of it, right? And it says, no, you got to put all your spending on the books. You got to account for it. So supporting the budget and its calls for that. We have a petition. It's on our website, winwithoutwar.org. Other folks have been doing some sign-on letters, and there's ways to organizationally support calls for eliminating the slush funds. Again, its technical name is bureaucratic mumbo-jumbo, the Overseas Contingency Operation Fund. But there are other programs. We could talk about them, things we've talked about before. My new favorite example is this thing called the Littoral Combat Ship, right? So it's a ship we've built using a very fancy name to say it works close towards land, littoral being close to land. It's not out for open warfare, but it's for doing things close to the coast. The original plan is to buy 52 of these. The first one, they couldn't decide on a contractor, so they decided to pick 2 contractors, right? So why not? So one contractor, Lockheed Martin's building one version, another contractor, Alstom, is building another version. One of the versions has a problem in that every time you try to turn it on, it catches fire, which is like a problem if you're on a boat, right? The other one,
Fracking
it's better
on the ship. It's fracking.
It's better on a boat than on land, I suppose. But the other one has a problem in that it keeps getting cracks. They've sent the first couple ones over to Singapore to try to figure out what they're going to use them for. They've been failing pretty much every test they put them under, and they've decided these things aren't really good for anything. You can kill them really easy if you shoot at them. They're not as fast. They don't serve particularly good functions. So to their credit, the President and Secretary Hagel this year said, we're not going to buy 52 anymore. That's really stupid. We don't have any purpose for them. They're dogs, we're not gonna use them. We're not gonna buy more than 32, right?
That's it, 32.
Which would make sense if we were in the process of buying those and you'd have to cut contracts on stuff. But we're not. We're in the process of, we've bought 4, essentially. We're in the process of buying somewhere between 16 and 24. And then we're negotiating contracts for 17 to 32, right? Or 25 to 32. So why not stop now? These things are about $500 million a boat. That's a lot, that's a good chunk of money. And as we buy fewer of them, the per ship cost is gonna go up. So instead of, if we've already said we're not gonna buy 52, right? Because it's a horrible ship and it's not useful for anything, why not just stop now? Why not just stop? Why buy any more? Why keep putting, it boggles the mind. So that's my new favorite example. The other thing that we obviously always talk about is the F-35. One of the reasons we talk about it, it's a $1.5 trillion program. It's the most expensive weapon system that anyone has ever bought ever in the history of the world. It doesn't have much utility. It doesn't really work. Even if it did work, we wouldn't have anyone to fight against because we don't do a lot of air-to-air combat anymore. It's not particularly good at the things the military says are our 21st century challenges, like climate change. F-35 doesn't do a lot for that. Transnational terrorism, small bands of groups. A fighter jet isn't much use against Al-Qaeda, all things considered. It's not going to be very useful for that. And threats that we see around the world, whether it's the crisis in Syria, the conflict in Ukraine, we aren't seeing a lot of calls for people to solve these things with fighter jets. We're seeing a lot of calls for people to solve these things with diplomacy. We're robbing from our diplomats to give money to our fighter jets at just the exact moment when we need to be investing in a diplomatic corps. We need to be investing in ways to solve these problems. So that's another one I'd highlight.
I always call it the F-36 instead of the F-35. I first add a number to it. I want to bring Miriam, if I can, to comment on what she's heard, what the budget looks like from your perspective, again, and reintroduce yourself to folks out in the audience. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Miriam Pemberton, Institute for Policy Studies. And the answer to Steve's question, why buy any more of these ships, is that the contractors have spread contracts in a lot of congressional districts, key committee chairs, and a lot of jobs are dependent on these weapon systems. And so what I've been focusing on, as everyone has heard too many times at these meetings, is a few key programs to offer assistance to defense-dependent communities, workers, and businesses to help them adjust to lower levels of Pentagon spending and adjust to new kinds of economic activity, civilian economic activity. Members of Congress who are taking the courageous stand of cutting the Pentagon need to be able to show that they care about those communities and workers and businesses that are going to be affected. And so I want to express my appreciation and commendation to the CPC for including fairly high up in their framework for cutting the defense budget, giving money to this centerpiece program whose whole purpose is to provide that adjustment assistance to defense-dependent workers and communities. This is actually in the Pentagon. It's the Office of Economic Adjustment. I feel like you've heard too many times me talking about
Maybe not, if that's okay.
Sorry, about this one centerpiece program. The other new tool that we have are these state commissions that are starting to be set up in several states around the country to come up with a plan to diversify a state's overly defense-dependent economy. So, surprise, surprise, we are going to have to fight to get the defense downsizing that we need, and we're also going to have to fight to make sure these tools are used in the right way. So in every case, as these Office of Economic Adjustment planning grants are being rolled out and these state commissions are being set up, forces are being brought to bear on these entities, these planning processes and these state commissions to manipulate the process to divert it from its true purpose. Its true purpose, again, being to help communities and workers and businesses to create alternative economic activity. So One of the favorite ways these commissions are being, pushed on is to say, yes, we need to diversify our defense dependent communities. Let's do it by pushing more arms exports out into the world. Diversification through arms exports, I guess my bottom line here is, of course, we're going to have to fight here as we have to fight everywhere. It's not enough to set up a commission to get a community one of these planning grants. We really have to stay with the process, monitor it, and make sure it stays focused on where it needs to be, where it needs to focus. So just one other thing I wanted to say about how to get the word out about the Better Off budget. An organization has been mentioned a few times here already, National Priorities Project in Tim's hometown of Northampton. When the Ryan budget comes out in a couple weeks, they will do a side-by-side comparison of the President's budget, the Ryan budget, and the Better Off budget, so that these comparisons can be very clear. And in addition, you go to their website and they'll sort of walk you through how to create a sense of trade-offs. Do we want to spend it on this or do we want to spend it on that? And relevant to this budget. And so these are very good tools, I think, that can be used by activists at the local level to create this local media around the budget.
Before we leave that too, just to remind folks outside, in addition to the National Priorities Project, Peace Action, U.S. Labor Against the War are working together and putting together webinars to help people to understand and move these numbers. So we know we can't do it alone. It's an inside-outside strategy. We can only do so much here. Miriam will be available. Joe Comerford from the National Priorities Project and Judith LeBlanc, who's been with us at the Roundtable previously, will be doing these webinars. So these are opportunities for these commissions that Miriam's talking about that we can plug in directly and do our work. If you had a question.
Well, I just wondered, Miriam, could you give the URL, the website address for National Priorities Project?
Nationalpriorities.org.
It's that easy. And they've been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize this
They
year,
have.
so we're very excited about it. We need to get you back to where you need to go.
Yeah, I just
Before you wrap it up, you want
yeah.
some comments, and we want to thank these guys as well before you take off.
Yeah, so Congressman Nelson wanted to make sure this budget had a lot of engagement from the progressive world, and we really appreciate all the input that you guys gave to our legislative staff and to our policy staff. Just from a communications perspective, families all around the country are sitting around in their dinner tables looking at each other, trying to figure out what they're going to do, and the Better Off budget is our answer for them. We just won on the federal workers executive order, big win on change CPI not being in the president's budget. We're in a progressive moment, and we hope this budget represents what you guys want to take to your people you try and activate every day. And we're looking forward to working together over the next couple weeks, especially as the Ryan budget drops and we get a chance to really explain to the American public why our vision is different and why our vision is better. So thanks for coming.
Can I just ask, Mike, would it be fair to say people are pretty cynical about Congress,
Yeah.
that it doesn't do anything? But the one thing Congress does do is pass a budget.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
all the other issues that we work on do come down to this.
Yep.
Because ultimately they are passing a budget and appropriating money for something.
Right. This is a document that we will continually go back to throughout the rest of the year whenever we're talking about our priority. When the budget dropped that week, NSA happened to be something that was on the table that people were talking about, so the budget got a lot of press because of the NSA piece. Every time there's a topic that comes up in the news, some portion of the Better Off budget will apply to it. And it's important that we constantly use this as a piece for us to go back to and organize around. And like you said, this is something that happens every year, and it sets our priorities, and we really appreciate all the work you guys do to get it out and to let people know that what progressives actually stand for.
Thanks for coming down and
Yeah.
shitting for Mike.
No, I appreciate it.
Something to get better.
Yeah, if you have any detailed policy questions, please send Mike Darner.
We can get those to Mike, no problem.
And thank you for putting up with a press guy.
No, don't mind the press guys right here. And to Stephen and Miriam, thank you. We want to, a couple of housekeeping measures. As Mike indicated, Michael Leidy and Michael Kessler, the importance that we get out early on the Better Off budget. So today, as we're meeting, there are activists around the country under the leadership of Mike Fox and Connor Borland in our national office. Over 300 letters will be delivered to congressional offices and Senate offices this week and next week alone in support of the Better Off budget. This is just the first step. In addition to the language that we spoke of already in regards on the revenue side of what's in the Better Off budget, there is specific language now that takes Bernie Sanders' single-payer bill and takes that language inside this budget as well to allow states to move forward with their struggles on the state single-payer fight. So we wanted to shift the debate over to that, but in order to do that, who better to frame up the discussion on single-payer, where we are for Medicare for All, than Michael for the National Nurses United, and we'll ask Michael to bring up our next guest, Mark Dedsey. Michael?
All right, thanks, Tim. One of the key aspects as we deal with the Affordable Care Act is figuring out what comes next, because we know that it has not solved the problems that face healthcare. Costs are rising, insurance premiums in the story today may go up significantly. We know that there's still maybe 25 million uninsured in the country. And at the same time, there's a real gridlock on this issue, perhaps even more than any other, on the Hill. So we're looking to state innovation as a way to build momentum to establish guaranteed health care for all. And really at the forefront of that campaign, because there's one of the key shifts has been unions who've looked at the Affordable Care Act implementation and found some major issues with it as it affects their health plans. At the same time, maybe a stronger desire for a solution that will actually solve their problems of continuing troubles at the bargaining table over health care. So one of the key organizations engaged in this fight is the Labor Campaign for Single Payer. And we're fortunate to have Mark Dedsey here today who can talk from the labor movement's perspective and also about the Sanders bill, S-1782, which I think we talked about a couple of months ago at the Roundtable, Tim. That's right.
When it was getting rolled out.
And I think we're very happy to welcome Mark here and get some more discussion on healthcare.
Thanks so much, Michael and Tim. It's great to be here. Let me give you just a brief overview of what's happening in the single payer world. Last week, March 11th, there was a historic Senate hearing chaired by Senator Bernie Sanders, subcommittee of the Senate Help Committee. The subject of the hearing was access and cost, what U.S. healthcare could learn from other countries. And it really was the first congressional hearing since the passage of the Affordable Care Act that began to grapple with where we ought to go from here and what we ought to do next. And it was really well run. They had experts on the healthcare systems of Taiwan, Denmark, France, and Canada there, as well as a political scientist who has done extensive studies of comparative studies of world healthcare systems, and as well as two conservative analysts who were invited by the Republican minority on the committee. So I would really advise that people pay attention to it. Dr. Danielle Martin, a young Canadian doctor, was the star of the hearing. She took Senator Burr to school on, really how you look at questions like access and waiting times and things, demolished a number of myths. There is a YouTube of her testimony that's gone viral. It's got over 500,000 hits. She's somewhat of a minor hero in Canada, which the Canadians are just fed up with the U.S. Ignoramuses denouncing their healthcare system without any basis in fact. So she came home to a real to applause in her country. So it's well worth your 5 minutes time to look up this YouTube video. The other thing that I personally enjoyed was the demolishing of a woman named Sally Pipes, who claims to be Canadian. I guess she is Canadian. She works for something.
She's from California, so
Right.
we'll let Canada have her.
She works for something called the Pacific Institute in California, and basically makes her living denouncing the Canadian healthcare system, and does it mostly through anecdotal tales and not through any kind of real analytical perspective. She tells scare stories about Canada, and has gotten a lot of attention over the course of the last few years in the healthcare debates. And she was completely and utterly demolished by Senator Sanders in a brilliant exchange, which is also in a YouTube video. So this was a very helpful sign to see this come out again, to see what you can accomplish, with a brief Senate hearing. Senator Sanders' bill is an important bill. We would like to see more U.S. senators sign on to that bill. I don't think there's any real block for them to do it, except that they haven't been really properly asked by their constituents, and we really need to make that happen. There will be a healthcare lobby day that a number of organizations are going to participate in on May 22nd of this year. We're going to ask people to come to Washington, D.C. if you're available, and work with us to lobby both in the Senate and in the House. And educate. And there will be
lobby, educate. Yeah.
There'll be a discussion and educational seminar, probably on the Congress side at some point during the day, and we hope that PDA will coordinate that with their monthly letter drops and actions in people's districts. So that's something we're working with a number of other groups, including Healthcare Now and Public Citizen. The nurses, I think, are going to be participating in that. So that's a important thing to begin to move forward on. I think the Senate hearing just shows that we really have won the battle of ideas. There's no real substantive critique of the single payer as an alternative. If you believe that everybody ought to have access to health care, and you believe that it ought to be affordably funded through some kind of public administration, there's just, there's no other questions out there in terms of the battle of ideas. The battle of politics, of course, is a different story, because politics is not so much about ideas as about power. And there's a lot of movement in that area. As Michael said, a number of unions now are also beginning to realize that we've got to move forward. There's serious problems with the status quo under the new status quo under the Affordable Care Act in terms of unions' ability to bargain for health care benefits under the employment-based health care system, and particularly among unions that have established union-sponsored health and welfare funds to provide quality health care for their members. These funds are under massive attack. A lot of them may not survive 5 years going forward from now, and that's causing a whole lot of urgency within the labor movement. Also, about a week ago, a union called Unite Here, which is a very respected union that represents a lot of low-wage workers around the country, came out with a very sharp critique of the Affordable Care Act and said that it will actually help increase inequality the way that it's going to be implemented, which is I thought a very important way to frame that issue. We're looking forward to working more closely with unions like that and moving that forward. The battleground, as Michael had said, it has shifted to the states. The next breakthroughs in single payer will follow we believe will follow the Vermont model, where they've implemented a legislation that puts the state on the road to establishing a single payer system over the next few years. We've got to monitor that and make sure that all of the changes take place in Vermont without being upset by big money that's flowing into the state right now from the for-profit medical industry. And then we've got to support other state initiatives. Unions are very interested in that. There's a number of developments. I'm particularly inspired with a number of recent events in New York State where some major statewide unions have moved to supporting a bill that's in the state assembly. It has majority support in the state assembly in New York. It's going to be blocked in the state Senate because of these obscure New York political realignments. But unions, some big statewide unions, including the hospital workers, 1199, have just thrown in endorsement for that, and that really is going to change the dynamics in New York. So there's a lot going on in the single-payer movement. I think that the healthcare justice fight is going to continue and is going to be invigorated in the coming months.
Mark, I wonder if you could, you summarized the hearing, right? Basically, that there's no really policy rationale for resisting single payer. Can you summarize kind of that exchange with Dr. Martin and the senator, what the senator was trying to get at and what her response was? Because I think it's instructive.
Yeah, well, the senator was trying to, he was focusing on the various tropes that they've used to attack the Canadian healthcare system. And so he first accused her, asserted that Canadian doctors are leaving the public healthcare system and to work for a private healthcare. And she completely, using statistics and studies, demolished that, showed that, in fact, where that has happened, which apparently is Australia, and I'm not an expert on that, that in fact in that country waiting times had increased, not decreased. Then he attacked her on the waiting time issue. She talked about how a single-payer system can effectively address waiting times, and then he talked about the so-called people leaving Canada to get health care, and which is particularly brilliant because the premier of Nova Scotia, one of the Maritimes, Newfoundland or Nova Scotia, went to Florida to get a kind of heart surgery that was in fact invented in Toronto and has the best outcomes in the world are in this one hospital in Toronto right down the street from where this doc works. And so she was able to completely undermine all of these assertions.
Yeah. So what do you think in terms of where there's no coincidence that the Vermont Senator, Bernie Sanders, is doing the single-payer bill that enables states to move forward with single-payer. Where do you think Vermont's going? Or where do you think it stands right now?
Well, Vermont, there's a number of hurdles that Vermont has to jump over. They passed a law that said that they will implement a single-payer system. Now they have to implement it. And they've gotten they've pulled they got the tiger by the tail, and the for-profit industry is mobilizing more and more. They're attacking it. Like many states, they had a lot of difficulty implementing the state exchange program, and of course the right wing will use that as a reason why the state can never implement anything efficiently, and why would you allow them to implement the Green Mountain Health for everybody in Vermont, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very crucial moment. They're supposed to be figuring out how they're going to finance the system right now, and there's some differences among the single-payer supporters about how that should happen. The Vermont Workers Center, I personally believe, has come up with the most inclusive and equitable financing program for single payer, the most progressive financing program for single payer. But there's some variations on that, and again, this makes them vulnerable to attacks from the healthcare industry. They're going to claim that Vermont is going to institute the largest tax increase in human history.
Modern history.
And it's true. They're going to transfer spending on private insurance into spending on social insurance. And so, now it's you could call that taxes, but it's, the total amount of spending on healthcare will go down in Vermont. So these are very crucial fights, and we have to be there. Vermont's, if we lose Vermont, the momentum will be really blunted for future reform. So it's very important that we be there. There's a unified movement in Vermont. The labor is working very closely with community organizations and with the healthcare community. So it's something we can win. but we need to be on top of it.
It seems like it's in some ways a tough time for progressives who want to continue to work on healthcare reform, because any criticism of the ACA either falls into the trap of the right-wing repeal crowd or runs afoul of those defenders of the ACA who don't want any criticism. So it's threading the needle a little bit if you look at how to promote single payer and alternative to the ACA without joining the outright opponents, right? And Unite Here is a good example of where there's a direct negative impact on their members, as you say, because those health plans have a lot of the costs associated with the ACA. There are certain fees levied on those employer plans, but the workers are not eligible for the subsidies that the ACA provides to purchase insurance, right? That's a key issue, right?
Exactly.
So
And their
advice.
employers would receive those subsidies if they didn't provide coverage to the
Yes.
union health plan. So,
Right. If they were non-union employers,
So
right.
a non-union
Yeah.
Marriott
Yes.
hotel
Yes.
can actually
Then they
get
get
the
it.
state to subsidize their health care
Yes.
benefits, while the unionized Hilton across the street has to pay more money for, and will receive no subsidies for those benefits.
Right.
So it's completely undercutting, any kind of just equity in healthcare in those industries.
It's quite striking because I talked to a researcher for Unite Here who said that the cost of healthcare benefits is about $9 an hour, which exceeds their wages in some cases. Non-union employers typically pay between $1 and $3. So that Marriott is paying $1.25, $1.75, maybe $3. Already huge labor savings, right, by not paying the full amount, shifting that cost to the worker. So when the union tries to organize them, they're basically saying that employer, if they were to say have to meet the union standard of $9 an hour for 200 workers, could cost that employer $30 million a year.
Yep.
So when you look from the union point of view on how healthcare benefits undermine wages, increase inequality, as you say, and at the same time make it more difficult to organize non-union workers, you realize the advantage of a social insurance system that takes it away from the employer-employee relationship.
Exactly, and I think more and more unions are finding that out, and there's no other place for them to land, because they can't go backwards into the repeal the ACA crowd, both because it's politically untenable, secondly because these trends may have been accelerated by the Affordable Care Act, but the attack on employment-based health care has been around for a long time. It's unsustainable to have health care costs exceed employer wage costs. You can't you cannot negotiate those kind of benefits long-term. So there's no way to sustainably maintain the employer-based healthcare system. We believe that when unions realize that and make this a survival priority in terms of their organizing and their political action, that's the time that we're going to begin to win single-payer systems, first in the states and then nationally.
Which brings us back around before we let you off, Mark, to better off budget. The language in the budget calls for the Sanders language to allow states to move towards the waivers and the tools they need to move, and that's part of the better off. Last time we got 82 votes. Let's hope maybe we can break 100. Before we do let you off, though, you talked about the opportunities in Vermont. Do you want to talk a little bit about California for folks who are watching who want to be part of the movement in California, on what NNU and some of the movement on single payer out in California would be, where people can plug in?
Right. Well, we've taken exactly the perspective, Mark, that you just laid out, that this is a survival threat to the unions. And we just did a presentation to the California Federation of Labor Legislative Conference on that question. And we have built a community labor coalition called the Campaign for Healthy California that is laying out a program to talk about the deficiencies of the Affordable Care Act in ways that do not join the repeal crowd, but point out that for progressives, it's very important to understand that those deficiencies in the ACA are a result of the private insurance company. They were the major stakeholder that shaped the legislation. They are the main economic beneficiaries of it because they have already 5 million new customers on their way maybe to tens of millions more. And it is precisely their profit margin and their structuring of access to care that ultimately makes it more expensive and denies people access to the care they need. So that the way the ACA, the insurance companies under the ACA save money is they restrict your choice of doctor. You have a narrow network of providers. Well, one of the things we're doing in California is to say, no, you should have complete choice of provider. Well, it so happens those national systems that Senator Sanders had the hearing about all have choice of provider. Why? Because they have single payer. So if the private insurance industry model can't deliver that, let's change it. But let's first say that the deficiency of the ACA is a result of that private insurance industry business model. So that's what we're doing in California, is addressing the question Mark raised, how do you get politically from here to there? Because our problem is not policy, our problem is political viability. So political viability runs through calling out the insurance companies as the problem and coming up with an equitable way to finance it that guarantees health care for all, provides comprehensive benefits, and solves the problem that unions and all workers really face in terms of health care. So we're building this coalition around a patient bill of rights now to address those deficiencies of the private insurance model, hold them accountable for the problems under the ACA, and then build a broad-based support that can go to the legislature and say, all right, pass single payer or put it on the ballot for a vote of the people. Here's how we're going to finance it. We're going to study that question just as they are in Vermont, and we're going to develop what we hope is a kind of scale campaign like we do in California when we have initiative fights that could win single payer at the ballot. And we're figuring out a timeline and a way to do it. The political reality is we're going to need the Democratic governor's support, Jerry Brown, because that's generally that was one of the keys in Vermont is getting the Democratic governor on board. So we're going to have to get Jerry Brown on board. The financing is the issue. Think of this from the public sector. $64 billion in unfunded retiree health costs in California for public workers. $64 billion in unfunded public worker retiree health costs. You can't solve the California budget when you got $64 billion out there. That's just for retirees, not including the $7 billion that they spend on current workers through the CalPERS system. So there are real fiscal mandates for solving the healthcare problem through single payer, just as they are on the union and worker side.
So from California to Vermont, our movement is vibrant and very much alive. Mark, thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to shift a little bit on our housekeeping measures now to the environment. The nurses have not only been busy on the question of the Robin Hood you've already heard and now on single payer, but the nurses are out front now on fracking out in California. We just had a big demonstration out in California.
Before we move off single payer.
Yes, we're going to move on now.
Well, could I make a point?
Well, we're running into time. Sure, go ahead, make your point.
Well, you talk a lot about the problems of the ACA and the insurance-driven healthcare industry, but you haven't really talked in general, in a succinct way, why people should support single payer. And let me just give a quick elevator speech on that.
Honestly, we don't need a speech. We're really short on time on that. Why don't I
30 seconds.
30 seconds, here we go. Why single payer?
Everybody, it removes almost all out-of-pocket costs because it eliminates co-pays and deductibles. It'll end medical bankruptcies, and you have complete choice of any medical provider. And I think it's important to emphasize those points and then go into the problems of the ACA and the insurance-driven system.
Sure. Good points. Thank you. This audience is pretty much up to speed. You won't have too much trouble convincing this group to be with you on that one. As I was saying, we want to shift gears now if we could. Thank you for that. Over to the environment now. As I said, the nurses were very busy with the Progressive Democrats and others out in Sacramento. Just as Michael said, we need to get the governor's attention in regards to single payer. We're also getting the governor's attention in regards to the question of fracking. If you can remember, a couple months ago, we endorsed 5 bills here at our roundtable through the leadership of Russell Green and our IoT. We wanted to invite Emily up here, Emily Worth from Food and Water Watch, to update a little bit for us where that legislation is. More importantly, what we can be doing, and then just in general, to update the fracking campaign. A lot going on in the environmental front, and we welcome Emily. Emily, thank you and welcome.
Thank you all so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here. And yes, it was a very exciting weekend last weekend in California. Great photos of I think 4,000 people who gathered to send a very clear message to Jerry Brown. That follows up on the beginnings of the process of passing a moratorium in the city of Los Angeles. And it's interesting, the news just this morning, the issue of fracking keeps us on our toes. We've got new developments every day. The city council is now asking for an investigation into the earthquake they experienced this week, 4.4, I think it was on the Richter scale, that it could somehow be linked to the injection of the fracking wastewater. So we'll have to watch that carefully, but that's just one of the many reasons we need to be paying careful attention to this issue. With regard to the loophole bills, I think we're just always continuing to push to try to get more co-sponsors. I mean, this is a very basic ask. The oil and gas industry should not be allowed to play by a different set of rules than all the other industries. And so, we would encourage you all to continue to, reach out to your members of Congress. As we need to have more co-sponsors on those bills. And like I said, there's no reason that this industry should get to play by a different set of rules. And it's made it very difficult to fully document the scope of all the problems that have been caused because they aren't subject to the basic environmental regulations. So that's a really important effort. Speaking of current events, I thought I'd mention an effort last week. More than 200 groups signed on to a letter, including the National Nurses and Progressive Democrats, that we submitted to President Obama and Secretary of State Kerry with regards to the oil and gas industry's efforts to push through the fast track of the export of liquefied natural gas. They're kind of using it as a geopolitical bargaining chip with the crisis that we're seeing in Ukraine. And so we push back against that. This is a very critical issue as we approve these massive $1 billion worth of cost into these LNG export facilities. There are more than 30 that have been proposals before the Department of Energy. This would lock us into drilling and fracking across the United States if these facilities get approved. And it would also require the build out of infrastructure through pipelines and compressor stations, all of which we know have very real effects for local communities. And so basically what would happen is we would be bearing the brunt of the environmental costs. Our energy prices would go up, and what we would be doing is allowing multinational corporations to get a higher price for gas. And so this is something that I think the progressive community really needs to unify behind, and it was good that we were able to get this letter in and weigh in a little bit on this debate. And so that's something else you can do. I mean, members of Congress need to hear that people are concerned about this and don't support this. So I know Food and Water Watch has a petition on our site. You can just call your member of Congress and express your concern with I think there are 5 bills before Congress right now to fast track this export, and so we need to push back against that. Do I have time to talk about one more thing, Tim? Yes,
Our mic
okay.
is your mic, please. Take a deep breath.
The third initiative that I've told you all about, a campaign that we're continuing to work on, has to do with reopening 3 critical EPA investigations into fracking and drinking water contamination. All 3 investigations in Pavilion, Wyoming, Dimmock, Pennsylvania, and Parker County, Texas were dropped or returned to the state by the Environmental Protection Agency. And the problem is these are critical to kind of understanding what we know are the real serious issues with water contamination and fracking. The preliminary findings all showed a likely link between drilling and fracking activity in these communities and the water contamination problems that the residents were experiencing. And by the EPA pulling out and not completing these studies, or by glossing over concerns with them, it allows members to go, or it allows the oil and gas industry to go before Congress, let's say, at a congressional hearing and say, well, the EPA itself says there are no problems, right? And so this is very damaging to the national narrative, and it's an obfuscation of the responsibility of the EPA to do this. And so we are pursuing this this request to reopen these investigations with Congress right now. We have a Dear Colleague letter that Representative Cartwright from Pennsylvania authored, which is really wonderful. This was a follow-up to a briefing that we held that, again, Representative Cartwright was great enough to sponsor. And I think so far we have 5 members, including, I think they're all in the Progressive Caucus, including Congressman Ellison. And so we're very grateful to Representatives Holt, Ellison, Huffman, Lowenthal, and then Cartwright, who are on this letter so far. But we really need to get more members onto this letter. And so that's something else. You can feel free to email me.
Contact information.
Yes, my email is eworth, WURTH, it's an unusual spelling, at F as in food, W as in water, and then the word watch, WATCH.org. And feel free to email me if you're interested in helping circulate this letter. If you want your member to hear from you about it, like I said, we really need to get more members on. So.
And just let me know. I'll get it to you if anybody needs to get that letter. Is there anybody who has not asked a question yet today that might have a question for Emily before we let her go? Any questions for Emily on fracking? Or?
I have a question.
Michael?
Oh, yeah.
You asked a question.
I know,
Okay,
I know.
go ahead.
That's what I said.
You get one more.
No one. I don't know, maybe we've talked about this before, but you mentioned gag clauses. Now, they're pretty severe, like in some states, right? So, for example, I think it's Pennsylvania, where you're not allowed to have a public discussion or report on the chemicals used in fracking. Is that the case, Emily, that there are prohibitions on?
Well, you mean doctors? So
yeah,
doctors have been gagged.
Right,
yes.
doctors have been gagged, so that a patient presents symptoms, say, in an area where fracking's occurring, and the patient says, well, what am I being exposed to? The doctor cannot say. Is that true?
Yeah, because it's considered a trade secret for the companies. And that even extends to healthcare providers. So that's a very dramatic example, I would say. It just seems crazy to me. But yes,
right, so where's that
true.
in place? That's in place in Pennsylvania, I think a couple other states too,
yeah,
isn't it?
I could get you that list. I
Yeah.
don't know. Does someone else know? I'm sorry.
I know Wyoming is in.
Wyoming, yeah.
Yeah, and I thought maybe a southern state too.
I think
Alabama
Louisiana
or
maybe, or
Louisiana,
yeah. Sorry, I don't know that right off the top
Yeah,
of
so
my head.
Fracking for 100.
that's of a concern to healthcare, providers. Obviously,
Absolutely.
you can't tell your patient what they've been exposed to. Think of that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really something.
Yeah.
So we should mention your URL, Food and Water.
Yes, foodandwaterwatch.org.
Yeah.
Feel free to visit our website. We work on the Robin Hood tax, TPP, and as well as fracking.
We're all in this together.
We are. That's right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Emily. We're going to turn to our own Andrea Miller now. Before we do that, I do just a couple of housekeeping measures to remind those of you who are watching. Letter drops. As we began the discussion, will end today. We're out delivering letters and making phone calls. If you'd like to be part of that effort, please let us know. Mike, Fox, and Connor are very busy. Our goal, as we said, this month alone is to reach over 300 offices. So if you haven't already committed yourself to visit your district office to deliver a letter in support of the Better Off budget, we hope you'll be a part of that. And then we'll be back next April with Michael next month to talk about how many votes we've rounded up. Our last panelist, and certainly not the last, certainly not least, is our own Andrea Miller. As you know, those of you who are regulars through the Roundtable, we're organized through our issue teams. These are folks that are organized specifically around the issues that unites them as progressives. We just heard from Emily, who's working very closely with Russell Green, who's doing a lot of our environmental work. Earlier, you heard from Stephen, who's been on a number of our IoT calls on ending occupation and ending wars. I'll let Andrea introduce herself. Not only does she head up one, but two IoTs, and today she's going to share with us that work and an upcoming event. Andrea, we're all yours.
Thanks, Tim and Michael. One of the things I want to give everybody that's listening is the website of the Better Off budget. So you can go there and you will be able to become a citizen co-sponsor if I could stop having texts coming through. The web address is www.betteroffbudget.squarespace.com. So www.betteroffbudget.squarespace.com. I don't make this stuff up.
Betteroffbudget.org will get you there too.
Okay, good.
.square.org.
Okay, right. Yeah, you can just do .org. All right. I'm going to do a brief. I think it's going to be brief update on the Equal Rights Amendment. As some people know, we lost our House co-sponsor, which means that we now need to get a new sponsor, which we have Representative Jackie Spear in California will be carrying our ERA 3-state remove the ratification deadline bill. And we also need to replace the 104 co-sponsors that we had on the bill. So we are currently in the process of doing that, and also working very, very hard to get Republican co-sponsorship on the bill so that the House version of the bill will be bipartisan like the Senate version of the bill. We have a number of upcoming events. Next Thursday, on the 27th of March, will be a Senate hearing hosted by Senator Ben Cardin. It will be at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the Dirksen Building, room G11. And there is going to be a panel assembled, and we're going to be talking about the Equal Rights Amendment, and most specifically, the viability of the three-state strategy, the whole idea of saying, we've already got 35 states, let's just go and get 3 more. What some people may not be aware of is, since this is a brand new year, the state legislatures have gone into session, and we have already had a number of bills introduced. We introduced an ERA ratification bill in Arizona. Arizona has not seen a bill for a decade. So they were not able to get a hearing, but this is an issue where for almost 30 years, people have said nothing. So one of the ways that we're really presenting this legislation is that this is constitutional pay equity. Pay equity is the big buzzword that we're hearing all over Capitol Hill. Well, great. Every group here representing any kind of progressive issue, we have seen good legislation passed, and then in subsequent legislatures, we watched it be eroded, if not outright overturned. And the one thing we know is that if we want something done, and we want it done once and done forever, we've got to take it all the way to the Constitution. So the ERA is now constitutional pay equity. So regardless of your age, regardless of your generation, now we think we've got language where you can understand exactly what it is that we're talking about. We presented the bill in Virginia. I actually presented the bill before the Virginia Senate, and incredibly pleasant surprise, 100% vote coming out of the Rules Committee. So we had all Democrats and all Republicans. The big win in Virginia was actually getting the Virginia ALEC-led House to actually bring the bill up in committee. So let me thank the women of Women Matter, Use Your Power, who literally were at that state house every single day. And it was really incredible when I was sitting in the cafeteria and literally every staffer that walked by addressed them by name and kind of gave them, they ought to vote for your bill just because of your persistence if it wasn't the right thing to do. There was a bill that was brought in Florida. Florida's been bringing a bill every year for 13 years. That bill was not brought out of committee. And our next round is going to be in the great state of Illinois. So Jeannie DeRay is going to be leading that fight in Illinois, and it's going to be a very interesting time. We're not going to have the fight about ALEC, but what we're going to be fighting about is people going, we need to do what because of when didn't that pass? So we're always dealing with the whole education thing of, yes, it passed, but it was never ratified. When we think about it, our last constitutional amendment was back in the 90s. So a lot of people that are in their 20s basically missed it. So we have a whole lot of people who've never seen the life of a constitutional amendment, and that's what we're working for. On the other side, directly related, I'm now working with the voter access issue team. We've got an election year coming up, and the great state of Virginia, we have a brand new form of voter suppression, and I just saw the petition. In Virginia, we are now photo ID state. So we are now requiring that if you don't have a photo ID, the state will provide one for you. But we now have an affidavit that says you swear upon penalty of perjury that it's a felony that you don't have a photo ID. Not that you misplaced it, forgot you had one, didn't realize it was valid. So we're coming up with simple, basic administrative procedures. We can now basically turn people into felons, at which point, once you are a felon, doesn't matter whether you spend 5 seconds in jail or not, you lose your right to vote for lifetime unless restored by the governor of Virginia. So we're going to be there's going to be a lot of, oh yeah, Virginia's a great place to live. There's going to be a lot of fights this year on the voter suppression fights. The old fights that we knew about, and a lot of those old fights, they are going to take a brand new shape. One more event way in September, people are going to need to plan. We are going to make sure that everybody is aware that the Equal Rights Amendment, constitutional pay equity, is out there, and we really, really, really need to do something about it. So September 13th, or rally, our Constitution Day rally on the Equal Rights Amendment, and Friday before the 12th, we're going to have a big lobby day, actually a big Educate Congress Day. It's not PDA, so they can lobby. This group, they've never been to DC before, so they're having a lobby day. So they're going to have a lobby day, and we're going to visit our representatives and our senators. So that's two of the things that I'm up to that are for public knowledge.
Thanks, Andrea. Any questions for Andrea related to the RA or to their mass incarceration? Thank you, Andrea.
All righty, thank you.
As we're marking our calendars then, as Andrea said, for September 13th, for our constitutional rally, and Mike, we know about our lobby day coming up on May 22nd. Before all of that, April 4th. Michael, you got some big news to let folks know about what we're up to.
Well, April 4th, as folks may know, is the I think it's 46th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And it's a time, obviously, of sadness, but also a time of profound opportunity because, of course, Dr. King was in Memphis on behalf of the sanitation workers who made the demand for dignity under the slogan at that time, I am a man. And so those of us active in the Robin Hood tax campaign want to take that day as an opportunity to say that the struggle for equality continues, and that as we face a Congress that seems increasingly, if anything, in Wall Street's pocket, it's a time to ask, how do we cure economic inequality and heal America? There's a quote that I think is relevant that we're using to publicize April 4th as this National Day of Action. And the day includes a press event here on the Hill with members of Congress, particularly members of the Congressional Black Caucus, who, along with Reverend Sandler and a representative from the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, Bill Lucy, will be talking about Dr. King's legacy and how the struggle to generate revenue from Wall Street so that we can, in fact, heal America and heal our communities is part of that legacy. Dr. King said, "This is America's opportunity to help bridge the gulf between the haves and the have-nots. The question is whether America will do it. There is nothing new about poverty. What is new is that we now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty. The real question is whether we have the will." And that's remarkable that we still have to ask that question 46 years later. But the truth is that we do. And for those of you who saw Charles Blow's op-ed, I think it was on Sunday, he wrote that the richest 10% of market income surged from around 30% in 1980 to 48% by 2012. So the richest 10% took 48% of the share of market income. The richest 1% share increased from 8% to 19%. That the gap in the last 10 years between the rich and everyone else has increased by 65%. So Dr. King asks us whether we have the will to address inequality, and it's profoundly worse when he first asked that. So on April 4th, we're going to be going to congressional offices around the country to say, we know where the money is, we know who took down the economy, now take the money back from them to rebuild our communities. And so go to robinhoodtax.org to participate in these actions on April 4th. It's a profound legacy that we inherit. All the things that we've talked about today, when we talk about the Better Off budget, we're essentially carrying on Dr. King's legacy to address inequality, because that's what a Better Off budget would do. And April 4th is a part of that effort.
Thank you, Michael. That brings us around to the full clock. I want to, if I could, ask those who other announcements, anything we may have missed. Anybody, Hallie, any Code Pink news you wanted to report? Any Code Pink news? Okay.
We should give folks the mic, too.
If you have an announcement, just come up here and we can make announcements. We have a couple minutes yet. Feel free to come up. Any announcements, organizational announcements, anything we may have missed. Open mic. Nobody wants an open mic? A room full of progressives. Come on, Paul, tell us what you're up to. And please introduce yourself if you could. Watch this stand. It's pretty tricky. We got a lot of money invested in this. It's from the Transformer movie.
Yeah,
there you go.
I was thinking it's gonna start shooting things at you. It's Paul Davis from Health Gap, and I just two things. And one is to echo about the importance of the Robin Hood tax events coming up. I know that we're excited about it, and we're pitching in, doing our part. And I think with you guys in Boston, I think just us chickens in Dave Camp's district, who we were going after a certain Congress member from New York City. Who's
isn't that Charles Rangel?
Yeah, it would be Charlie
Mr.
Rangel.
Rangel to you.
Mr. Rangold. So chasing some candidates around Pennsylvania who were on the House Ways and Means Committee, Congresswoman Schwartz, and I think some others. But anyway, it's very timely and a good powerful message. So we're grateful to you guys for having first instigated this thing. The other thing is just related to the Better Off budget. The Better budget is I'm not sure people have seen this. They probably haven't. President Obama's budget is dismantling PEPFAR. So if over, which is a global AIDS program, and if over the years there have been very steep increases in the numbers of people on treatment, that's happened because PEPFAR is pretty awesome, and because they've been able to do more in spite of year after year after year of funding cuts. This year, the president promised world leaders in a World AIDS Day ceremony at the White House last December for an AIDS-free generation, increased numbers of people on treatment, increase fund, to at least support continued funding for the Global Fund and for PEPFAR. That's not what's in his budget. What's in his budget is cuts. What's in his budget is something where, like, we stand at this pinnacle. If you saw any of the science in the last week coming from the retroviruses conference in Boston, where 2 weeks ago, where we have 100% suppression of new infections if you get people medicine, if they are virally suppressed. Where the president is standing right now, there's a tipping point, right? But then there's sort of like, what is it, like the precipice of a tipping pinnacle? Like right now, we're in this position where the epidemic can explode or continue. Just by continuing the trajectory we were on, we can actually eradicate this disease probably by 2020. You would think that would be a pretty awesome legacy for President Obama to have, but he's not been interested in it so far, so we need to work very hard on Congress to restore some funding in an appropriations process to PEPFAR. Congresswoman Lee has a letter specific to PEPFAR. It's just out this week. It has, I think, 30 signers already, but we need to get at least 100 or so, and we're working on a Senate sponsor. So
I was going to say a job for Congresswoman Barbara Lee.
Yeah.
She's on it. High five for Barbara Lee.
Thanks for making it.
Paul. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Mike, you had an announcement?
Yes, for everybody who hasn't had enough, if this just whetted your appetite, this Saturday at 2:15 at the University of DC Law School, UDC Law School, that's at Connecticut and Yuma, we're going to be having a wonderful panel discussion with Congressman John Conyers, from the NAACP, Hillary Shelton, from the Hip Hop Caucus. We're going to be having Reverend Lennox Yearwood. We're also going to be having Gloria Minot from WPFW-FM Pacifica, and it's going to be part of the UDC Law School Law Day. So please come down for this great event.
Mike, thank you. Anybody else, any other announcements you want to make? Again, then in closing, we want to encourage those of you who have not committed to deliver your letters. There's still plenty of time to do that. As Mark Dudzik said, May 22nd, PDA will be part of the Educate Congress on the work that we want to do on continuing our struggles for single payer. And most importantly, April 4th, as Michael said, we'll be back here on the Hill. The roundtable will continue again. I don't know whether or not I'll be able to be here. Michael is committed to be here to keep the ship afloat. We do want to thank everybody today again, and of course, all of our friends at We Act Radio for live streaming for us and making sure those of you who couldn't join us here in the Capitol as part of our Inside Outside movement could be a part of this. And I do want to give Michael the opportunity to close us out and any closing remarks. Michael, we're all yours.
Well, I really want to thank you, Tim, because I think it's obvious to folks that these roundtables and a lot of the incredible work that's going on around the country with progressive members of Congress and outside has been a result of you and your dedication. So this is definitely a tremendous personal honor for me to continue what you've done here, but I very much hope that you're going to continue it with us. So thank you.
As long as I can.
Yeah.
I need you to my left. Thanks, everybody. Please take a moment to meet your neighbor if you didn't before you leave. Lots of propaganda on the table. How many of you will be part of the Better Off budget campaign now moving forward? We'll see everybody next month. Thank you. We'll also be on the Hartman Show tonight at 5 o'clock if you want to check that out as well. Thanks, everybody. Stephen, thank you. One down, buddy.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I'm going to tell you a funny story really fast. So
Do you know Michael?
Hi, Michael. I'm
Hi.
Allie with Good Things.
Yeah, how are
Allie
you?
is Code
Allie.
Pink. She's the left-hand person on Medea. That's how I see her as.
I got to tell you a funny story really fast. With Jay Johnson, the secretary of the DHS, and we were in his office on Monday.